Hello and welcome to the Financial Wellness Hour. I am your host, Hirsch Serman, and I'm thrilled to have you here with us today on WGSN-DB, the Going Solo Network. This show is for those wanting to learn more about creating financial wellness, and we're going to look at different life cycles and explore them both financially and emotionally, because personal finances are usually not about the money, but rather about the emotions associated with your finances. We are going to have some general discussions, but we'd love to make it more relevant. We'd love to hear from you. So please call in. You can reach me through my website, lifecycle.financial. That's lifecycle.financial, or you can post your comments and questions on Facebook, YouTube, or wherever else you might be watching this or listening. So one of my favorite sayings in all things is timing is everything, not just in comedy. And that is so true when it comes to filing a divorce as well. More than any other month, January has the largest amount of divorces that are filed. And there's a lot of reasons. For tax reasons, you might want to get that married filing jointly in. But a lot of the time it is cited that there was an emotional void while sharing the holidays with somebody. Well, I can tell you this, filing a divorce needs to be done strategically, not emotionally. And I'm a cold, heartless MBA CPA, right? So I can say that, I guess. But seriously, it needs to be done with much thought and preparation. Being prepared and organized, understanding where the large conflicts might happen, getting your financial house in order or your emotional care in place are all things that are so important when going through the process. Today's show, we're going to be talking about ready, set, file. And I'm not talking about taxes for a change, which is, by the way, tax season started yesterday. I'm going to digress, sorry. It opened yesterday for e-filing, and it goes through April 18th. And there are a lot of things that need to be aware of. So please check out my latest blog at lifecycle.financial. It covers all these things. And I'm going to get back to the show. So today's show, as I said earlier, we are talking about ready, set, file. And my guest today is Tiffany Hughes. She is the founder of the law offices of Tiffany Hughes. And Tiffany has, I'm not going to run through them all, but she has been ranked as a top 100 lawyer. She has been published by the HuffPost. She has a top 10 best attorney for client satisfaction accolade, which I've got to tell you is rare for people to be recognized as that, for sure. She's a top 40 family lawyer, under 40 for 5 straight years. And she is so much more. And apparently you got to keep me on track today, Tiffany, because I've already digressed. It's really, actually, it truly is an honor to have you here today. Tiffany, welcome to the show.
Thank you. The pleasure is all mine. Thank you for having me. I'm very excited to be here. So
This is such a great topic, and I think you just bring so much to the table. I did not, on purpose, cover your education and your vast experience, so I am going to ask you to cover a lot of that. I'm going to ask you to just talk a little bit about your background and your experiences, so people can understand where the passion comes from and the drive that comes from
I'm going to try to be not as much TMI as possible.
you.
But I think it's important to know. So my parents got divorced when I was 7 years old. My mom, she suffered from mental illness. My dad suffered from alcoholism for a very long time, and still does, actually. I mean, he still has issues. So they divorced. My mom was never, there was no way to treat her illness. It was just, well, there was no way to cure it. There was ways to treat it, but it was very, very difficult. And it often put me in the role of being a caretaker and taking care of her and taking care of myself. So I kind of learned from a young age of this kind of adult role of wanting to help and caring and aiding. So when I graduated from high school, I was 17 years old. And then I went to UIC in Chicago. When I was there, I started working with women, children. There were some men, but the majority of it was women and children. And there was a clinic that was set up of sorts where women and children that have been in domestic violence or abuse, whether it's physical, mental, emotional, they would go there and they would seek assistance with, orders of protection, referrals out for attorneys. And it was there that I then felt again like I was in that role of caring. And it was I just can't explain it. It was something that, just like with dealing with my mom and having to care for her financially at a very young age, that I just couldn't. I don't know. I was just pulled to it. Seeing the divorce, experiencing the divorce. I had a guardian ad litem, which is an attorney that represents children who represented me. I mean, it was a pretty drawn out process, and then being there to assist these women and children was, it just it filled and satisfied this caring and loving nature that I have about myself, of being able to help people in need when they don't have anybody. So I decided from there to go to law school. Out of law school, I immediately opened up my own firm. I actually started building my firm in my third year of law school. I worked at some other firms and I saw the way that they build and I saw the way that they were structured and they ran like a business. And I didn't want anything like that. I couldn't imagine going into this without the sole purpose of being to care and to nurture and to help. And instead, I saw firms, the majority of them, as being just an enterprise and not really in it for the right reasons. So started my firm off over a decade ago, actually, and focused primarily in family law and have been assisting people ever since.
Clearly, we see where the passion comes from. We see that it's more than a job by every stretch, and appreciate you sharing as detailed as you did. Even what you shared could not always be easy when there's hundreds, if not thousands, of people listening. So thank you for that. And so when somebody starts the process, what is important for listeners to know, that are starting the process of a divorce?
Well, the first thing you should do, um, if you're if you know you're ready, then I would contact an attorney, definitely. If you don't know if you're ready or not, a lot of people, there's usually one person in the household typically that handles all the financials. So what I recommend is, if you're not really sure that you want to contact an attorney, because I know that that can be scary and it can be a first step that you might not be ready to take. I would say if you're an individual that doesn't have a very vast knowledge of the financials, I would start looking into that. I would start, looking at documents as they come in the mail, any statements, anything that you can try to familiarize yourself with what accounts there are, expenses that there are, anything related to income, anything that you can get, that you can familiarize yourself with as it relates to what we call assets, income, debts, accounts. So that way, when you do make that step to call a lawyer, or when you do decide that you're ready to move forward, that you have a better knowledge base of what we're looking at.
I think there's so many pieces there that are important that I just want to reiterate a little bit differently as well. That, you don't want to be rushed in learning something new, especially this important, and taking your time and learning it and getting to know it is so important. I think also from a perspective of, I've had so many clients say to me, "Oh, I'm sorry, I know I should know this when it comes to the finances," but I've never heard anyone say, "Ah, Hirsch, I really have no idea how to run a household." They never apologize on that side. It's always the finance side. But as you said, we kind of divide and conquer responsibilities as a married couple. It doesn't mean the other spouse is doing it well. And you can certainly pick it up, learn it, and take your life in a whole new direction in a very positive and, as we say, financially wellness, or reaching financial wellness, should I say, is so important. But learning that area and getting understanding and comfort, because there are other things that are going to be thrust on you from a stress and emotional perspective. The more you can do upfront and take your time, I think, becomes an important piece to that as well. And there are a lot of considerations. That is obviously a very, very large one. But there are a lot of considerations when you think through and you're contemplating a divorce. What do you think are some of the most significant items that people do not think through prior to moving forward with a divorce that they really should be thinking about?
I think you need to think about realistically, which also kind of goes hand in hand with the financials, is and obtaining that knowledge base if you don't have it. But I think a lot of people don't think about or understand what it's going to look like after the process. And I mean this in a good way and in a bad way. A lot of my clients don't know a lot about their financials, which is not uncommon. Nothing wrong with that. But then at the end, as we were going through the process, they're now looking at, well, now, if they were a full-time stay-at-home mother, now it's like, well, how much maintenance am I going to receive? What's going to happen with this? What am I going to be able to keep the house? Am I going to be able, to stay home still? Am I going to have to obtain a job? What is that going to look like? And when I say that it's a good and a bad thing, I mean that some people end up staying in relationships and marriages that they shouldn't stay in, that are not healthy, because of the fact that they are afraid of what may be on the other side once the divorce is final. And so I think it's something to think about, but I don't think it has to be a bad thing. I think the reality is when you're thinking about the fact that there's going to be two households, you'd have to think that, okay, well, I have to have enough money to be able to pay for my household. And depending on how much assets there are, and depending on, that individual's previous employment and background, like, I mean, I have individuals like Hirsch herself, like, that you can help clients. Like we have a bunch of people that, and I know mutually and separately, that can help people to get through the process and to alleviate a lot of the concerns that they may have about what could be potentially bad at the end.
Yeah, I think also putting that objective expert view into the mix becomes so important as well. I'm sure you've seen this. You mentioned the house, and that's always like a topic of its own, seems to be, versus almost every other topic. And just because somebody can afford the home doesn't always make it the right decision either. So having that objective view of somebody who's experienced and can think beyond the next 6 months sometimes, I think becomes a very important resource for somebody to reach out to as well. So looking at that, what are some of the most important divorce mistakes that people need to avoid?
Well, first and foremost, unless you're looking, this is kind of my joke, I'll tell you. I always say, look, I'm happy to do the work. I have no problem doing the work, but I'm trying to make it so that you don't have to spend an exorbitant amount of money on attorney's fees. But if you want me to do the work, I'm happy to do it. So what they end up doing, and I tell them from the beginning, do not discuss any points of division of property or assets, or, I'll give you $5,000 a month for maintenance, or, like, don't talk about any of that. I'm 100% fine with you discussing things after the client and I discuss it. I review it. I run the reports for maintenance if it's an issue. I look at the assets, and then I will give my client an idea of what I think a fair settlement would be. And then if he or she wants to discuss it with the other spouse, that's fine. But these side deals are being made before I've had an opportunity to review it. And obviously, my clients don't know what the law is. Why should they? Because that's why they hired me. So don't discuss terms of settlement. Don't make promises about things that you just don't know, because what will end up happening is you will end up paying an exorbitant amount of money in attorney's fees, because now you've got one spouse who said, well, you told me I was going to get this and you promised me that. And then instead of it turning into a potentially amicable divorce, now it's a heavily contested divorce with that spouse being very, very upset and very resentful for you not keeping those promises, quote unquote, that you should have never made.
So long term, you're really just causing damage, even though the heart is in the right place. You just got to be very careful. I've even seen where people also, to solidify your point there, they'll make terms or agree to things that just cannot happen. One of the classic ones is, you get to keep the house. I'm going to give you maintenance, but you've got to refinance in 60 days. Well, no mortgage bank in the world is going to 60 days later give you a mortgage, finalize that mortgage and fund it, because they're going to want usually 6 months worth of those maintenance, what used to be called alimony payments. So sometimes you creating situations that just cannot even happen, and that turns sour pretty quickly as well. So I think people just need to be very careful, and communication becomes a huge piece to this. So, and I think simplifying your life before you get into the negotiations is such an important piece. I work with my clients, usually I try to take a prioritize, organize, and simplify approach. You really understand what you want, what is important, what you honed in on, and you've got less things to focus on. It's easier to simplify your life. And you don't have to take on the world and conquer the world today. You've got these things that you know are now important. You've identified them. It helps you focus on what's important, which sometimes is not real easy when you're in this fog of emotion and in the stress of everything. So preparing for a divorce in the right way is going to help you with those outcomes. It could keep it amicable, as you said earlier. What can somebody do prior to starting the divorce process?
I mean, I think you should set up like what your goals are. Like, know the things that are important to you. Does that mean that, if you have children, is it, establishing a parenting time schedule and what that looks like for you? In the financial, part of it, is it really important for you that you want to keep the house? Whether or not that may be realistic is a whole separate issue. But setting goals, and then as we go through the process together, i.e., the client and I, um, being able to understand and to pivot and move as it relates to what those goals look like, and the reality that those goals may not be achievable. So keeping an open mind, setting realistic expectations and goals from the beginning, and trying to think of what ideally you view this separation and this divorce to look like, and what that means for you. As again, like we were talking about, maybe obtaining employment, looking ahead of the game. So if you know that you were a stay-at-home mom and the kids are in school, are you planning on getting a job during the day when the kids are at school? Is that something that you want to do? What options do you have? And doing, taking a look at those things and combining that with your overall objectives of the things that you would like to achieve.
And I think, as you said, and we've said a couple times now, having those priorities, looking forward, looking beyond the divorce, because you've heard this a million times as well. I just want this to be over, right? But you need to look at it beyond. This is actually the first chapter in the rest of your life. It's not the last chapter in this part of your life. But I think the other piece there that you said that's so important is you need to be realistic. I've had people say, I want 50-50 on the custody, and then you look at them going, you travel 70% of the time for work. Realistic
Yes.
expectations are so important. They really are. And if you are realistic, it changes the whole game. It's less confrontational. And I always say to people, emotions can be the most expensive part of your divorce, and you don't want that. As you mentioned earlier, you can make it a really expensive endeavor, or you don't have to make it an expensive endeavor. But a lot of that is in the client's control, not your and mine as a professional. So
Right.
you did mention two words that I want to come back to after the break, was separation and divorce. And I want to dive into that when we come back. But before, let's go to a break. I'm going to ask, how can people get in touch with you to talk more about their situation?
Feel free to email me, and I'll spell it out for you. My email is tiffanyhughes@THUGHESLAW.com. So Tiffany Hughes at tHughesLaw.com.
Great. And we will be right back in a couple minutes to continue the conversation.
Great.
The family court system There are no winners. Everybody loses, especially the children. I know, because my custody battle lasted years, was completely unnecessary, and financially devastating. That experience inspired SplitSmart. SplitSmart is designed to empower both parents by giving them the structure they need to stay on course for a more peaceful and respectful co-parenting future. For less than amicable couples, our unique line item negotiation approach helps soften sometimes emotional stances into child-centered agreements that both parents can live with. Do you want your children to thrive and grow up with healthy, loving relationships with both parents? How much easier would it be if you could bypass the conflict and create a clear, supportive, and comprehensive co-parenting plan and schedule that's tailored specifically for your family? Can you imagine what it would be like if there were no arguments about money or child support? If any of this appeals to you, if you want to minimize the expense and drama of divorce, do yourself and your children a big favor and use SplitSmart to craft your co-parenting and support plans. And as an added benefit, even if you've done your best and still can't get all the way there, SplitSmart will have your information well organized, so a skilled mediator or family lawyer can efficiently help your family cross the finish line. Visit splitsmart.com today to get started on creating a brighter and more joyous tomorrow for you and your kids.
Hello and welcome back to the Financial Wellness Hour. We are on WGSN-DB, the Going Solo Network, and we are talking Ready, Set, File with Tiffany Hughes. And I'm going to recap some of the things that we've already spoken about because they are just that important to reiterate. Obviously, again, I want to thank you again for what you shared about your personal story. We spoke about, well, I guess I started the show just by digressing right away, which was not the best start, but we spoke about things to know when starting the process and things to kind of be aware of and how to protect yourself a little bit with some of those. The areas people do not think through and that they should be thinking through, some of the common mistakes that people make that in the long term really work against them in a much larger way than you would think sometimes. What to do prior to filing, setting your priorities. I think one of the themes we've spoken about is understanding what is important to you and your priorities beyond the divorce and what it's going to look like beyond the divorce, because sometimes it's so difficult to actually look at that far ahead, and that far ahead could even just be 3 to 6 months down the road sometimes. And then one of the things you spoke about, you used the words legal separate, or you use separation and divorce, and I think too often we see people in the process are using terms that are misunderstood, especially from a legal perspective. So can you define what is the difference between a legal separation and a divorce?
Absolutely. So a legal separation is where it's not a permanent solution. It's a solution that essentially will legally, as the name, separate you. So assets can be divided, but it doesn't mean necessarily that you would have access to your other spouse's assets. It also doesn't enable you to remarry. So if you get a legal separation, you're still divorced. It's kind of almost in a sense like a postnuptial agreement, where there are agreements that are being made in a legal separation that then are memorialized in a court order with the court that are enforceable. But you're not divorced. You can't remarry. And eventually, if you ever do want to remarry, or further than divide up the assets that weren't contained in that order, then you would have to obtain a divorce. Most of the time, usually this was years ago, but a lot of people wanted to get a legal separation because they were older and they were on their other spouse's health insurance plan. But then Obamacare came about, where there was no issue with being able to obtain health care if you had a pre-existing health condition that would previously not allow you to obtain that medical insurance. So now legal separation is kind of a dinosaur, unless there's an issue as far as religion. People aren't looking to get legally separated. They're looking to get divorced. They want to officially divide up all of the assets. They want to eventually remarry, and they want to separate themselves officially and in a permanent sense with a divorce.
One of the things I always am cautionary, I'm not an attorney, but I always tell people they need to understand each state law, because they may have a little bit of a different nuance. The concept is going to be the same in this instance, but each state does have its law. In fact, from my CDFA training, if I remember correctly, Texas does not actually even recognize the status of a legal separation. So just make sure that you understand your state's laws, even though you understand the concept as a whole. And then sometimes, as we mentioned earlier, sometimes one spouse is happy and the other one's not happy. So can I still get a divorce if the other spouse doesn't want to get divorced?
I love this question. I get this all the time. Absolutely. Yes. Yes, it doesn't matter if the other spouse doesn't want to get divorced. If you want to get divorced in Illinois, so I'm licensed in Illinois and in Florida, and both states are called no fault states, which means that before you used to be able to get divorced for, you'd have to prove the reason, adultery, et cetera. But in Illinois and Florida, it's no fault, it's irreconcilable differences, meaning that there was a breakdown in your marriage and that you no longer wish to remain married, and that it would not be in the best interest of the family or the individuals. So if you want to get divorced and the other person does not, and let's say the other person doesn't even participate in the process, I can get you divorced. So either way, I will get you divorced.
And obviously, we'd much rather it be amicable. There's so many considerations after as well, whether it's co-parenting because you've got children, but obviously you want to know your options and your responsibilities. And yes, you can move on with life, which for many can be very good news just to hear that. All right, so I've prepared to file. I've identified my priorities. We know what we want after the divorce. We've got our financial picture and our view of what it's going to look like afterwards. We've got our emotional support set up. Are there things that I just should not discuss with my spouse once I file specifically, or just in general? What are topics to stay away from?
I would stay away from discussing things that you discuss with your lawyer. There's a lot of things that I'm going to say you as like a client, I'm telling you that is not for other people to know. So a lot of strategy goes into this when it comes to negotiation and, certain ways in which we move through the case. If there's delays, I push it. If there's issues with settlement, I will then reconstruct and figure out from the knowledge that I know about what the other person wants, and use that to my advantage. And so going back and talking to your spouse about these things, the things that we're discussing, is not a good idea and will potentially ruin what we're going to be doing and the strategy that we do have in place.
Right. And, I think just coming back to those priorities, especially understanding yours, is so important. One of the things I do with clients, I actually have a whole session where I look at their priorities, meaning my clients, but then I also say to them, now let's match up what your spouse is thinking and where their priorities lie, because then you kind of know where those big discussions are. You know what you can give up. You know how to create more of a strategy in going into that negotiation, if you can think of beyond yourself and include your spouse's priorities as well. Sometimes that's not easy. Sometimes you need somebody to guide you. As we've said, you're not always at your best when you're going through a divorce. You are emotional. No one wants to think they're difficult to deal with or not at their best. Nobody wants that, right? But I hate to break it to those listening who are going through a divorce, but sometimes there are things that are not easy to work with when it comes to somebody who's in a stressed situation and living in a stress. And that can impact the working relationship with your professionals, like with Tiffany, who would be your attorney. And you have recognized, like you being Tiffany, not the client. Tiffany, you've been recognized for your customer satisfaction, and you're dealing with a stressed, fearful group. It's not an easy thing to do. What do you have some tips for listeners in how they can communicate better with their attorneys?
I would say first off, you have to have a trusting relationship, and you have to have a connection with the individual that you have hired. And so I think it's really important that you decide the attorney that you want and that you move forward with somebody that you have that relationship with. The next thing is, being a really good listener is something that a lot of, and I'm now speaking about attorneys, but
Right.
A lot of attorneys don't really listen. They don't really have an interest in, what it is. It's more of like a process. And it's like, well, I'm going to take you to A to Z. And I'm not really going to explain a whole lot to you. I'm just going to get you divorced. And so my route is very different. So I am, knowledge is power. So, no one's heard of a petition for dissolution. Most people don't know what that is. What is a financial affidavit? Well, they filed a counter petition. What does that mean? And look at all the stuff they put in that draft, and they filed that with the court, and why they're saying all these things. And so I think it's important that at the very beginning that that you have that trust with that attorney that you have selected, and that you make sure that that attorney is providing you with that knowledge and the roadmap of what is going on, because that will make it so much easier for you and a lot less stressful of a process if you understand the framework of the process in the first place.
Right. So, and I call people like you and me the new generation. It used to be the next generation of a divorce attorney was just somebody who came in. I think the new generation are people who've been impacted by it in some fashion. And so we have a whole different desire to help them through it. And again, I'm not going to repeat all the accolades that I mentioned earlier and that you have, but clearly you do it differently. So share your secret. What is the Coke recipe? Everybody wants to know, right? What makes you different from other divorce attorneys?
You know what? Because of my background and because of the person that I am, I look at this in such a personal way. This is, you are going through a very, very traumatic event. It's going to be a great event. It'll be a new chapter, and I'm going to get you through there and get you to that new point. But, I really take pride in going above and beyond and being there and providing them with that knowledge and providing them with that personalized service that you don't get. Again, as I mentioned earlier, the majority of firms, they're run like a business.
Yeah.
I have 4 associates. I could have 20 associates. I could take on every single case and turn into a large firm. And I don't want to. I would lose that real specialized personal touch and care that I'm able to offer. And you get too big and you lose that. And I think that, it's very important for people to understand that, most attorneys looking at it as a business, most of them are looking at it as, certain internal things at their firms that they have to meet. And you're just part of that ladder to get them to the numbers at the end of the year. Yeah, I don't have that. I don't believe in that. I believe in doing good. I believe in helping you when you're not, like when you're divorced and you need help, or during the divorce you need, you know, professionals like yourself, Hirsch, like, whatever I can do, I go above and beyond. And it's not something that I see.
And that's incredibly unique. I do want to point that out. I know attorneys in about 7 different states that I work in 7 states right now. And I know attorneys, and it is very, very unique, because I will say this, you going through a divorce as a client, your situation is very unique. It's your situation, and it's not the same as anyone else's. And to go to a firm that says, well, we have a process, and you either have to fit that process or fit into the process, which may not be right for you, or not, you don't know yet, right? So having somebody who will personalize their attention for you is a very, very unique thing within this industry for sure. And there's enough fears. People have fears of the unknown. People have a lot of fears. And so I'm going to ask you to talk a little bit. I know we're going to start wrapping up, but can you talk just a little bit more about how you work with people in setting those expectations, guiding them, things like that?
Yeah, of course. So, you know, my joke is, you might not like what I have to say, but I will never lie to you and I will never BS you. And I'm very blunt, but I'm going to tell you what the law is. And I'm going to tell you ways that we can maneuver and we can strategize together. But unfortunately, I don't have the power to change the law. So what I go through with them is what the law is. And then I'm going through and creating what's called a marital balance sheet, which is their assets and debts. And then also anything that you had before the marriage. So again, this is like my standard, kind of way that I explain things. If I start talking all this legal jargon, the client's not going to understand what I'm saying. So if I say, and I'm going to create a balance sheet that has non-marital assets and marital assets, and well, what are non-marital assets? What are marital assets? So going through and explaining the fundamentals and then explaining how I'm going to be drafting the balance sheet. Now they know what I'm talking about. And they're like, oh, okay. So that inheritance I got, that's non-marital. And I said,
Right.
yeah, depending on what you did with it. But we'll get there. So, just evaluating with them and going over, what is very unique in their particular situation and explaining to them that I think that there might be pushback here. I think that we have room to push for you here. I think we can use this as leverage. I think we can do this. And so going through that and just giving them different options of ways to which we can finalize it. And also explaining, all of the amazingly wonderful, fun things of discovery, which is the tendering of documents and the answering of questions under oath. So explaining to them about, getting those things organized and walking them through once they see Hirsch, once they see the balance sheet, things start to click. It's like, okay, so if we have $500,000 and he's entitled to 250 and I'm entitled to 250, but I want to keep the house. And it's like, well, now you've got a visual. And a lot of people are, a lot of them are visual learners and some of them just aren't. So I've got to kind of pivot and move with them to assist them in the process and whatever that may be and how they learn so that I can assist them going forward with, the final overall term.
It's funny you say that about the house and the marital balance sheet, because I've had clients say to me, oh, I thought everything was 50-50. And then I'll say to them, so are you living on the left side or the right side of the house? Like, no, it's not quite like that, right? So how does that work, right? And educating them along the way, I think is such a vital and a difference, definitely a difference. We're going to start wrapping up, unfortunately, but I'm going to ask just one more time, how can people get in touch with you to learn more?
Feel free to email me personally. My email address is TIFFANYHUGHESLAW.com. So that's Tiffany Hughes, my name, at tHughesLaw.com.
Great. I appreciate it. I encourage everyone to go to Tiffany's website as well. There's some great information on there, some great blogs. And you can also see some of her impressive and actually really cool media appearances that she's been on as well. Tiffany, I really appreciate you shedding light and sharing insights in how to navigate such a huge decision. And you did it just in a very easy, logical way, which tells me that when a client comes to you, this is how you're going to walk them through it and makes it much easier for them as well and takes a lot of the fear and the stress away, which is wonderful. I am Hirsch Serman, your host for the Financial Wellness Hour. Please reach out to me through my website. It's lifecycle.financial. Again, lifecycle.financial. That's if you have questions for me or if you want to get in touch with Tiffany Hughes, our guest today. Thank you, CC Schatz. As always, just makes it very easy for me and Tiffany to have a great conversation. I look forward to you joining me next week and for you to reach out and connect with me. Have a great week. Thank you.